5 friends, Luke, Dom, Hutch, Phil, and Rob, got together after a long time. They were planning a trip while sitting in a club. Everyone suggested different places to visit. When Rob proposed hiking in the mountains of Sweden, no one seemed interested. So, the conversation continued. After leaving the club, Luke and Rob went into a wine shop and found the owner lying in a corner in a devastated state. Before they could grasp the situation, the group of thugs emerged from inside, and they realized the shop had been hijacked. Luke quickly hid aside, while the thugs demanded Rob's wallet and wedding ring. Although Rob agreed to give the money, he hesitated to part with the ring. One of the thugs suddenly attacked and killed Rob. At that moment, Luke woke up suddenly, realizing it was all just a nightmare. However, that day's incident continued to haunt him like a bad dream. He always wondered if he had shown courage and acted sooner. Maybe things wouldn't have turned out that way. Because of this, Luke felt the most guilty among all his friends. A few months later, they all went hiking in the mountains of North Sweden to honor Rob's memory because Rob always wanted to visit that place. They traveled to a high spot, made a small memorial for Rob, and drank wine to pay tribute to him. Among the friends, Hutch always tried to console Luke, telling him he wasn't responsible for what happened. But convincing the heart wasn't that easy. They decided to rest there for the night and planned to start their journey the next morning. But when they woke up, they found it was raining heavily. After somehow packing up their belongings, they started trekking after the rain stopped. On the way, Dom twisted his ankle and fell. Hutch checked the map and decided they should continue through the forest trail instead of climbing the steep mountain path. As they walked into the forest, they were shocked to see a large animal carcass hanging from a tree. It was grotesquely split in half, with its internal organs scattered below. Fresh blood was still dripping, indicating the death was very recent. It didn't seem like the work of a bear or any wild animal. They decided not to dwell on it and continued their journey. The sky started to darken again, and soon heavy rain poured down, accompanied by flashes of lightning and thunder. They decided to set up a temporary camp there. That's when Luke noticed some strange symbols carved on the nearby trees. But his attention soon shifted when they found an abandoned cabin deeper in the forest. Breaking the door open, they went inside and noticed those same symbols hanging from the ceiling. Suddenly, they heard a scream from the attic. When they went up to investigate, they found a bizarre headless structure made of straw, holding horn-like objects in its hands and with legs resembling those of an animal. With eerie sounds outside and a creepy figure inside, Hutch guessed it might be some tribal deity or spirit. But whatever it was, they were exhausted and needed rest, so they all went to sleep. In the middle of the night, lightning flashes continued repeatedly. Suddenly, Luke woke up and saw a bright light outside. When he opened the door, he found himself back at the wine shop that day. A loud noise startled him, and he looked down to see 3 holes in his chest. He had no explanation for how or why it happened. Just then, he heard Hutch screaming. Rushing inside, he saw that Hutch had wet himself in his sleep due to a nightmare. Dom was sitting in a weird position, repeatedly calling his wife's name. Phil was kneeling naked in front of the headless figure, seemingly praying. Luke was utterly stunned and didn't know what to say. Once they all regained their senses, they were shocked again when they stepped outside. The mysterious symbols had appeared on all the trees overnight. Hutch wanted to follow the southwest trail, but Dom suggested a different route, thinking it might lead them to civilization. So they ventured deeper into the dense forest. They all wanted to discuss the previous night's events, but had no logical explanation. As the forest became denser, the mystery deepened. They came across another abandoned cabin, similar to the one from last night, but no one dared to enter. Dom's leg pain worsened, so they took a break. Hutch grew impatient, wanting to keep moving. Luke suggested they rest while he climbed a hill to look for a way out. But the area felt eerily silent, with only the sound of a woodpecker breaking the stillness. Between the rows of trees, he thought he saw a gigantic creature moving with a terrifying roar. Not wasting a moment, Luke ran back and told his friends, but they didn't believe him. Luke showed them the scars on his chest and asked, "Do you have any explanation for this?" Dom blamed Luke for Rob's death, and the argument almost turned into a fight. Hutch intervened, urging everyone to stick together in such a dire situation. He emphasized the importance of staying calm and making a proper plan to move forward. Continuing on, they found an old, buried tent near a clearing in the forest. Inside, there was a family photo and an expired credit card named Ina Edison from 1984. This meant either the family had died in this forest, or they were still missing. The discovery left them with more questions and a deep sense of unease. They decided to camp there for the night. Their food and water supply was almost depleted, and at this rate, they would starve in a few days. Hutch pulled Luke aside and confided that Dom's leg injury was getting worse, and Phil was also growing weak. Hutch admitted that Luke was the only one with some hiking experience. He asked Luke to take the essentials and find a way out of the forest to get help, while he stayed behind with the others. After that, everyone fell asleep, but Luke sat there deep in thought. Suddenly, he heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching from within the jungle. He heard that terrifying noise. Gathering courage, Luke stepped out of the tent and saw that same wine shop again. As the thugs attacked Rob, the big trees shook violently. At that moment, Luke woke up with a jolt. Phil was screaming loudly. Phil informed them that a monstrous, shadowy figure had taken Hatch away. Just then, they heard Hatch's agonized screams echoing from within the jungle, followed by an otherworldly roar. Moments later, everything fell silent. When they regained their senses, they all rushed to find Hatch. But strangely, Hatch was nowhere to be found. Dom suggested that they should return to the tent for now, as all the necessary supplies were there. If they got lost, it could lead to even more danger. Dom's reasoning made sense, so they decided to search for Hatch in the morning and returned to the tent. They waited until dawn. As soon as there was a little light, they entered the jungle again to search and suddenly froze in shock. Hatch's dead body was hanging from a large tree. His chest to his waist had been brutally ripped open by some monstrous force. They couldn't bear the horrific death of their friend. How would they face Hatch's wife and children? Finally, following Dom's advice, they took Hatch down from the tree and hurriedly buried him before continuing their journey, hoping to survive. By now, they realized that the nightmares they had in that cursed house were all coming true one by one. Dom didn't say much. They continued on the path Hatch had suggested. After walking for several hours, they found a stream and quenched their thirst. Luke noticed strange circular footprints with multiple legs on the wet ground leading deeper into the jungle. However, all the large trees along the path were broken, so they moved toward the southwest. But how long could they continue like this? Their bodies were exhausted. When Luke climbed up to a higher spot, he noticed the flickering light of a settlement's torches far in the jungle. When Luke came down to tell the others, suddenly something snatched Phil away. The terrifying scream shook the entire jungle. As Luke tried to run, he hit his head and once again saw Rob in his imagination. When he regained consciousness, he found Phil's blood-stained torch lying in front of him. Even then, the ominous presence was still felt in the jungle. Dom and Luke hid behind a tree trunk. They realized they had to reach that settlement beyond the jungle at any cost. There was no time to waste. They held on to each other and started running. They barely made it out of the jungle and entered the settlement, only to be terrified again. Phil's dead body was hanging from a nearby tree. Overcome with fear, they broke down the door of the house in front of them, only to find an old gramophone playing inside. A giant figure wearing a cloak was sitting there. Just then, Luke was kicked hard and lost consciousness. He didn't know how long he was unconscious. When he woke up, he saw that they were both tied up. A strange noise was coming from outside. Luke tried to look outside through a crack in the wooden wall. He saw some people cutting wood and carrying it somewhere to build something. As he tried to free himself using a glass bottle on the table, two men and an old woman entered the room. Who were they? What did they want? They were utterly confused. The woman then showed them the same scar on her chest, indicating that everyone here was aware of what was happening. But the old woman didn't give Dom any water and instead ordered the two men in a strange language to take him away. They dragged Dom into the next room and started beating him mercilessly. Meanwhile, another woman came and told Luke that they were preparing for a ritual sacrifice. Hearing this, Luke fainted. After some time, they left Dom badly injured. There was complete silence. Suddenly, Dom spoke up. That day, I didn't tell anyone about my nightmare, because I didn't believe it was going to come true. I dreamt that some people were sacrificing me to a forest god, or that unknown creature, and my wife Mary was standing there watching. I'm about to die, Luke. There's no way to save me, but I want you to burn this whole place down and get back to the city. Luke tried to muster up courage, but what Dom had predicted came true. They nailed him to a tree and hung him up. Dom saw multiple dead bodies hanging from every tree in the jungle. It was his fate. Darkness descended upon the heart of the deep jungle. It seemed as though everything was preparing for its arrival. Suddenly, an unearthly roar echoed through the jungle. Everyone was trembling with fear, too scared to even look up. One by one, the large trees in the jungle were falling. Just then, Mary appeared from the jungle and approached Dom. Dom was stunned. Mary came close and touched his cheek, but her eyes slowly turned completely white. Then it became clear. It wasn't Mary, but a terrifying creature. The figure had long arms. Its face wasn't clearly visible, only 2 glowing dots in the dark sockets of its eyes. The giant creature lifted Dom and impaled him on the highest branch, hanging him there with his chest torn open. Luke was watching this horrifying scene through the crack in the wooden wall, trembling with fear. He didn't know what to do. Sitting idle won't help. So as soon as Luke broke his thumb to free himself from captivity and tried to escape, a woman entered the room. Luke asked the woman, "Won't Dom's body be taken down from the tree?" The woman smiled and replied, "It's a small offering to the ancient god Joton. He has been the deity of this forest since ancient times." According to Norse mythology, the Joton were created to fight against gods and humans. They often hindered Thor's actions in Midgard and Asgard. In this Swedish forest, people worship the species of Joton, and even uttering his name is considered a sin. Joton protects them and keeps them safe from all earthly pain, suffering, and death. Every year, Joton selects one person from different groups who come to the forest, so that chosen person can worship him. The one who feels the most guilt or sorrow is chosen by Joton. In this case, Luke was chosen because he blamed himself the most for Rob's death. As a result, he constantly struggled with inner conflict. The woman said, "If you do not bow down and worship him, Joton will kill you too." After the woman left, as Luke tried to escape, he suddenly heard groaning sounds. Holding a torch, he opened the door next to him and was shocked. Inside, several living corpses were scattered around. They were alive in a strange, unnatural state. He realized the true meaning of immortality for them. Seeing this horrifying scene, Luke prayed for the peace of their souls and set each body on fire. While escaping, he knocked the old woman unconscious and set the entire house ablaze. The cursed settlement in the forest burned fiercely. The agonizing cries of the living corpses echoed in the distance. At that moment, Joton roared and emerged from the forest. As soon as everyone saw him, they bowed their heads and sat down. Joton was enraged because all the living corpses were burned. In his fury, he began killing everyone brutally. Meanwhile, Luke gathered a gun and an axe from the storeroom and fought his way through every obstacle. When he finally reached the edge of the burning settlement, he saw Joton in his full form for the first time. Joton had impaled someone on his horn and was holding them up. Luke watched the terrifying scene with wide, unblinking eyes. He aimed the gun at Joton and fired, but nothing happened. In the next moment, Joton roared and charged at him. Suddenly, Luke saw the wine shop from that fateful night in front of him. At that very moment, Joton struck him down, placing his foot on Luke's chest, roaring fiercely to assert his dominance. Luke kept his head bowed, but noticed the axe lying nearby. Seizing the opportunity, he struck Jotun's face with the axe and started running with all his strength. Using every ounce of his energy, Luke ran through the forest, across muddy ground, over sharp rocks, barefoot until he finally emerged from the forest. Strangely, Joton stopped at the forest's edge. He wouldn't cross over. This meant Jotun's power and curse were confined to a specific area. Luke looked back at him, and with all his pent-up pain and sorrow, he screamed out loud, breaking free from his long-standing guilt as if he had been reborn. Joton let out a supernatural roar at him, but Luke had conquered the forest's curse and managed to return to civilization. With this, the movie ends.